Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, or good evening. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another edition of Friday Morning at the Funhouse with Martin Popoff. Good morning, Martin. I could say good morning to you because I know we're on the same time zone, but I
Yeah,
know some
absolutely. Yeah.
people come upon these videos. It's in the middle of the night, middle of the afternoon. So,
Yeah, I like doing these in the morning, that's for sure. As I tell people, my IQ drops 10 points an hour starting at about noon. So
I am a morning guy too. So yeah,
yeah,
I'm usually ready to go every morning, bright and early. As we get later on in the day, yeah, I can still hold my own like early evening, but I don't know much past that. It's debatable. As we have, I don't know about you, but as we have another rainy, dreary day. It's like that's Chicago. So except I don't live in New York City. Another rainy day in New York City. We had like 3 days of 95 degrees, and now it's been rainy for 2 days, and just blah,
yeah,
whatever.
yeah. Yeah, it's been changing a lot. I think I might get out for a jog today
Cool.
and listen to some of these albums that other people love to hate, right? So
Yes, yes. So it's all about today. So we haven't done this one, and a lot of people have asked for this. So how about those albums that everybody seems to dislike or everybody hates, everybody thinks suck, but we actually kind of like? So we've each picked out five. I think Martin and I have already decided we'll probably do a part two of this because there's some we haven't used. And yeah, I mean, we fully understand there's probably plenty of people out there who do like these albums as well. But the general consensus over the years has been that these albums are kind of the stinkers in the catalogs of these bands by the majority, not by everybody, but we're pretty fond of them regardless. So I'll have Martin kick us off with his number five.
all right, so I'm going to start with one here that was almost the first one that comes to mind. I'll disagree a little bit about the stinker in the catalog part. It's more like with this band, Fozzy. It's more like the band itself is the stinker in heavy metal for a lot of people. I mean, it's just unbelievable how visceral response people have to this band. They either love them to death or hate the whole concept, the whole idea. And I swear a lot of it has to do with the jealousy of this great wrestler, Chris Jericho, coming in and thinking he can do heavy metal. And I would resoundingly say he can do heavy metal. And the idea of this band coming over from Stuck Mojo, that's a whole nother sort of story. But yeah, this band gets an amazing visceral response one way or another, and it's the first one that came to mind. But I would say this is their best album in the catalog, and I'll just tell you, superlatively, this is crazy, but this album came out in 2005. I did a big, massive record review book called The Collector's Guide to Heavy Metal. Volume 4 of the 2000s, and I had a big list of my top 100 favorite albums of the 2000s. And at the time, I actually listed this as the greatest album of all the 2000s. And I look at that and I go, "What is going on? Like what was I thinking?" And then I play it and I go, "Yep, it's absolutely a masterpiece, start to finish." I mean, so this is the first album they did that didn't have a lot of covers on it, and it's easy to. That's the other reason people have this love-hate relationship with Fozzy, or on the hate side of it, let's say, having albums with a lot of covers on it, and they were pretty straightforward and well produced and all that kind of stuff. But this record here, boy, where do you even start on this? Mike Martin as a guitar genius, Frank Foncier as just a absolute drumming legend that should be one of the biggest drummers in the world. And then you've got Rich Ward coming in from Stuck Mojo as a guitarist, as a songwriter, as a singer. The guy's just got the whole package. The guy should be an absolute multimillionaire writing songs for other people, I swear to God. And then Chris Jericho does an amazing job on here as well. But it's got some guests on it. Marty Friedman's on it, Mark Tremonti, Miles Kennedy. But the big one to me is Zach Wilde guests on the song Wanderlust doing a solo. And I have often listed that as one of my top favorite guitar solos of all time by anybody, along with Kim Mitchell, rumor has it, and what else? Baby Please Don't Go, Thin Lizzy. This record, I still stand by having it way up there for the 2000s. And swear to God, it's not a poser thing with this record. I literally have played this record 200 to 400 times. I just played it over and over and over again. The production's amazing. The drum sound, Everything about it is really cool. And you know, I'm not saying that as a absolute slavish sycophantic Fozzy fan, because the later records, I think they go a little bit too much into those kind of emo choruses with big gang vocals and stuff. So this is my favorite still. And when you love a record that much, nothing's ever going to kind of stand up to it again. It's just a magic sort of time. And they're great live. They're just jumping around like crazy. Rich with those big leg kicks and, you know, consummate backing vocals, like, you know, a bunch of them sing. Rich sings, the bass player sings. And at the time when this came out, like I say, just the virtuosity in the band was just unparalleled, who they had there. So there you go, Fozzy, All That Remains.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when that album came out, I listened to it to death. And I was actually in some ways a little shocked at how much I really liked that album, because the previous ones with all the covers were fun. But at that point in time, I think a lot of us was like, well, how seriously can we take these guys? You know, they've got this wrestler fronting the band, and I have lots of respect for Chris Jericho as a wrestler. You know him very well. I've met him a few times. The guy is a metalhead fan, true and true. Every inch of him is all about heavy metal. He knows his shit. So it's not like he's just doing this to collect a paycheck, because let's be frank, you know, it's not like Fozzy are making big bucks here, right?
Yeah.
But it's all about the songs on that album. Every track on that album is so memorable. And I've seen people shit on it and the band all these years, and I kind of never understood why. You know, a good heavy metal album is a good heavy metal album.
Yeah.
Forget who he is. Just forget all that. Just listen to it. It's like if you took the Fozzy name off of it and you just played it for someone who really wasn't, who just had no idea that it was Fozzy. I guarantee, and they're into that kind of metal, I guarantee you they'd like it. But as soon as they know who it is, it's almost like they want to say they hate it, right?
Yeah. And it's hard to categorize. I mean, sometimes to me, it sounds like commercial overkill. Sometimes it sounds very slightly hair metal-y, maybe because of Chris. Sometimes it sounds a little new metal-y because it's got these incredibly complex rhythms on it. But I would say more than anything, it reminds me of traditional early power metal.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Yep.
So hard, but it is hard to categorize because it's really proggy and complicated too at the same time.
Yeah.
So,
and maybe that works against them a little bit.
Yeah.
I don't know. All right. My first choice of today at number 5 from 1985. So this is an album from a very well-respected, beloved band, but it's generally looked at as one of the, if not the weakest album in their discography. And I was as guilty as anybody else as kind of discounting it back in the day when it first came out. And, this almost kind of falls into the same category as never used to like it, but over time I've grown to love it type of thing. And I'm talking about Club Ninja by Blue Öyster Cult. It follows an album, Revolution by Night, which was seen as kind of a disappointment considering all the success they had before of it. Also a fine album, I think. And then this came out again, the middle of the 80s, drums, synths, programmed drums, lots of synthesizers, a lot of all these kind of lush backing vocals and things like that. And a lot of people were like, this is not the heavy, dark Blue Öyster Cult that I really like. And I thought the same thing back in the day. But kind of going through this album and giving it another chance over the last couple of decades, I have grown to really like this album a lot, despite the people that still kind of tear it down as one of the weakest in the catalog. I mean, you've got Dancing in the Ruins and Perfect Water, which have become like live staples for the band and beloved songs. White Flags is terrific. Spy in the House at Night is great. Madness to the Method. There's some really, really good stuff on here. And despite all the synths and despite the programmed drums, there's some great riffing on here. This is, to me, Buck sings the majority of the songs on here, and he sounds amazing. And the songs are really catchy. And you know what? It just still sounds like classic Blue Öyster Cult to me. And it's like, I wonder, like we were all living through this filter back in the day that we were like, it's almost like we were told, do not like this album. And certainly it's not a top 5 classic from the band. I'm not saying that, but I think it deserves a lot more credit than we gave it back in the day. And I think all these years later, it holds up really well in their catalog, and it's not nearly as bad as we all thought it was. So that's my first choice for today.
Yeah, interesting one. I play that album a lot too now, and I love the cover of White Flags. That's by Legat, Canadian band. They put out a double album. I think it was called Illumination, something like that. So that was really wild to see them cover Legat, and then Perfect Water and Dancing in the Ruins, amazing. And I think you hit the nail on the head. I never really thought of it that way, but it's because it's such a great Buck album.
Yeah.
And it's not heavy, and I'm fine with not heavy Blue Öyster Cult every once in a while, right? So yeah, they are one of my favorite bands of all time, and I actually, thinking about the entire catalog, there's no albums that I would rate as pretty bad, but that has always been one of the lower ones. But I get a lot of value out of it still.
Yeah. So I mean, if there's people out there watching who still kind of never gave this album a chance and just kind of put it down because maybe you heard it once or twice in the mid 80s, and parts of it are kind of almost hair metal-y, shall we say, in spots. It's a different album for them for sure. Give it another chance. It has really held up well over the years, and I think you'll be surprised at how good the songs really are on there. So.
Yeah, cool. All right. So my next choice, let me just move this here. So we did an episode of our video show, The Contrarians, on this band, and I picked Abominog as my favorite Uriah Heep album. Now, that's contrarian for a favorite Uriah Heep album, to be sure, but the ones that are liked a lot less than that and talked about a lot less are the follow-up Head First and Equator. My official pick for this episode is Head First. A lot of people don't talk about this album very much, and it does rate fairly low in the catalog. People do have a lot of love for Abominog, but picking it first, like I say, is odd. But picking this fairly high is pretty odd as well. But I almost get as much value out of this album as I get out of Abominog. I love the Pete Golby era, and it's almost a two-fisted thing because I'm not a big Equator hater either, right? Tony Platt, the production's a little weird on here, but to me, this is almost as good as Abominog, which is a statement, right? So this is definitely one that a lot of people don't like, but I think the production is less raw than Abominog, and that's kind of good. It's got just really good, solid, competent production on it. But The Other Side of Midnight is very close to almost my favorite song of this entire era. This whole heavy, tough, Bad Company, Foreigner sound that they get. Stay on Top, Lonely Nights. There's some mellow poppy stuff on here. Red Lights is a heavy one. Weekend Warriors is a heavy one. It's just a good collection of songs that go into that interesting rainbow Foreigner zone with really good keyboards from John Sinclair on it. And again, Pete Golby era. I'm fine with all three of those records. So there you go. Head First.
Yeah, I am too. I like the, obviously, I think for me, out of the three of them, I like them in the order that they came out. Abominog is clearly the best of the three. I think that album is very, very solid. I listened to it a ton when it came out. I'm not as big on Equator. I think the songs are there. I'm with you. I don't really like the production. I don't think mixed guitars are enough in the mix. It's a very keyboard driven album, but still there's some good songs on there. Interesting how both of our picks came from basically the same era, our last two, right? Blue Öyster Cult and Uriah Heep, both kind of toiling, but then again, everybody else was, right? I mean, that's nothing new at all. Yeah, that's a great choice. Nobody talks about that album ever.
Yeah, for sure.
It's a shame. All right, so Martin and I have been talking about a lot about Kiss lately in our little discussions offline, and I think Kiss had to be a part of my picks today, I should say. And I've gone with an album that I think a lot of people had a lot of issues with at the time. I still think a lot of people have a lot of issues with, mainly because of one song. But I will say I love this album when it came out. I still really like it a lot. It always ranks pretty high for me when I look at the entire Kiss catalog. I'm talking about Dynasty.
Okay, yeah.
It's like, one song ruins an album for people. It's like, all right, so they did the kind of funky disco thing with I Was Made for Loving You, but is it really a terrible song? I would argue that it's not. Should it have been a Kiss song? Well, maybe you got a point there. But, you've got the remake of 2000 Man, Sure Knows Something, and Magic Touch are two great Paul Stanley songs. I love Dirty Living because I love when Peter sings. I think that's a terrific song. Charisma, good Gene song. You got Hard Times is pretty rocking. You got Ace singing that. Then you got X-Ray Eyes and Save Your Love finishing off the album. I think the album sounds great. It's very immediate. Sure, it's not as heavy or rocking as the couple albums that came before it. It's certainly not as classic as Love Gun, Rock and Roll Over Destroyer, and the first three, but I don't think it's the disaster that everybody seems to make it out to be. And people always say, oh yeah, Dynasty, Kiss went totally disco on that album. They didn't. They flirted with it on one song. That's pretty much it. The rest of it is really, really good. And you know what? The disco song is pretty fucking good too. So there you have it.
Yeah. And the one thing I'll say about that record too, is that, you know, I go back to Rock and Roll Over and Love Gun, and they've kind of crept a little bit down in my estimation. I still think Destroyer is the best Kiss album. I know it's a boring choice, but I do think it is. But when you compare Dynasty to even both of those, it's not that much mellower. I mean, it's still got as kind of as many riffs. And the other thing about it, which I think should be pointed out, is I think the production on this record is better than those two. I mean, the production on both Love Gun and Rock and Roll Over are kind of iffy, and they kind of start distracting me a little about really loving what's going on there. I think there's just some tightening up and just a little bit more high fidelity to Dynasty. And yeah, I played it completely the other day on a jog, and I was just loving everything all in a row. I thought it was a well sequenced, action packed record.
Yeah, I agree. You know, and as far as Rock and Roll Over and Love Gun go, I think for me, in recent times, you know, that's talking years and years, I have found I have started to appreciate Rock and Roll Over more. And I think Love Gun has slipped for me. Because I think Love Gun is one of those albums, and we all have them in our favorites, where you look at an album really highly based on a couple of tracks. But when you really look at the album in total, there's some weak stuff on there. And that's how I look at Love Gun now. There's probably 4 songs that are drop dead Kiss classics. Few of the others, for me, don't hold up as well. And I think that makes me look at that album a little bit differently today than I would have in like 1980, 1990.
Yeah. But it's funny. I used to think, you know, growing up, you had your ranking of the heaviest Kiss songs of all time. And I used to think Baby Driver, wow, that's a heavy song. And I go back and play it and I go, this is kind of dumb. You know, it's got
still a great song though.
Yeah, but it's got Peter singing, right?
Yeah.
But it's not that heavy. I mean, it used to rank as, I mean, it does rank as one of the heaviest songs on that album. And when Peter sings, that always raises the heaviness level a little, right? But I go back on some of these ones that I thought were pretty heavy at the time, and I'm going, man, that's not very heavy at all. So anyways. All right. Oh yeah, I had these out just for fun. So this was just a few of the other Fozzy albums of later. Well, there's an earlier one. Some of the early ones. Okay, so my next choice is, let's get these down here, move some of the way. So we've got this album right here, Gamma 3. Gamma 3. There's a single for the first time off of Gamma 3, and there's a CD reissue of Gamma 3. So this album is something that's really come up in my estimation a lot, in terms of, like, I love all the Gamma albums. Gamma 4 is a really frustrating one. That's a later one, but still a totally legitimate lineup, but it only has a few good songs, and the rest are like off in a weird place that I just wish it was better so much. You know, you get those albums that you just wish you could love way more than you do. It just frustrates the heck out of you, right? But Gamma 3 is one that I was horrified with when it first came out, because all the guitars were gone. The heaviness, just the relentless heaviness of Gamma 2 was gone. And it was replaced by this sophisticated whole Mitchell Froom keyboard arrangements all over everything, really tight production, really poppy, really melodic. But I've, in recent years, played that album, excuse me, more than almost any Gamma album. Well, definitely more than Gamma 2. I haven't played that a lot in the last 15, 20 years. Gamma 1, I still play a lot. But Gamma 3 is definitely the one that I play a lot recently. And it reminds me a little bit about sort of what Rush did with Signals. just this sophisticated, and what we were talking about with Club Ninja even, right? And Uriah Heep. You know, you can go into that zone, and when you first get it, you're just ticked off about it. But later on, you know, you just start loving all these songs because they're like easy drinking, right? Easy drinkability to them, right? And I really like the fact that that Ronnie is being creatively fearless and just moving very rapidly. I mean, that's obviously worked to his detriment at times as well. But in this case, I think you know, it was career suicide, I think, number one, because it's still kind of proggy, right? It's a little proggy, it's a little pop rocky. It's not that commercial. But he was, you know, you got to give him credit for being another one of these guitarists that says, oh, I'm this guitar hero, but I'm just going to let the keyboardist do everything for a while, right? So
then he turns around and does like a guitar instrumental album, like what, a year or two later, right? It's just like, go figure.
So there you go, Gamma 3.
Yeah, it's a good choice. Yeah, a really solid record. You know, is it the classic that the first two are? You know, maybe not, but it's still still really strong. Yeah,
as long as you got Davey Pattison, right? I mean, that makes a big difference. What a great consummate lead singer. What a cool voice he's got on him.
Yeah, I always liked him. Always liked his voice. Absolutely. All right, I'm going to go a little more recent here. Recent being 10 years ago. Journey Eclipse. And I don't know so much whether this is an album that most people seem to hate or just an album that people refuse to listen to. I think it's more of the latter. Because, you know, I've talked to many a Journey fan over the years and seen tons of, you know, keyboard people who are proclaiming their, you know, lifelong love for Steve Perry and how they can't accept anything from the Journey camp if it doesn't include Steve Perry, who now has been gone from the band for a long, long time, right? He's not coming back. And it's almost like, you know, did you like Journey because you like the band, or did you only listen to Journey because Steve Perry was singing? And I'm a big Steve Perry fan. I totally am. But I'm of the opinion, you know, sometimes these bands move on from each other for a reason. And, you know, Journey was still about those other guys, right? You know, Steve was not in the band from the beginning. So they hire this guy, Arnel Pineda. Obviously, you know, after a couple other folks didn't really quite work out, Arnel brings that kind of Steve Perry sound. He's a really good front man. They put out some other new music before this, but they put this out. This is the last studio record that they've done to date, although they've got another one in the works. And this is a seriously, seriously good Journey album, but nobody would listen to it. You know, obviously we're living in a day where bands like this, you don't really see hit singles. You don't see, you know, they release singles, but nobody's playing it. Here you've got a dozen tracks. It's easily the heaviest Journey album. If you are a Journey fan and you love Neil Schon, this is like Neil Schon's album. You've got, you know, but again, it still sounds like a Journey record. There's still tons of soaring harmonies, catchy hooks. There's a couple ballads on here. There's some really heavy rockers that's kind of proggy in spots. I know I say that all the time. Dennis DeYoung told me yesterday I use that term quite liberally. He said it should instead of proggy, it should be prog-like. Dennis told me. I'm like, okay, I still like proggy better because I've been saying proggy for a million years. I'm not going to change. I'm too old for that. City of Hope, Edge of the Moment is a great song. You got Chain of Love, catchy, upbeat. Tantra is an awesome, gorgeous ballad that should have been a hit. Got Human Feel, Ritual, Resonate, so memorable. I don't know. To me, on first listen, I thought this was a killer Journey album. It's so memorable, so catchy, great guitar work. The whole band is on fire, and nobody would give it a chance. I mean, this sank without a trace. I remember reading interviews with Neil saying, you know what, nobody bothered with this. Why should we do another studio album? And it's now taken a decade for him to kind of change his tune. Of course, they got a new lineup and they're trying new things. But man, if you are a Journey fan, all right, just for a minute, forget the whole no Steve Perry, no Journey thing. Just listen to it. Just give it a chance. It's such a really enjoyable album. I never understood why people either didn't like it or say that, you know, they listened to it once and they're like, but it's not Steve Perry. I'm not listening to it anymore. Or they're like, I'm not going to listen to it because Steve's not in the band anymore. It's like, well, even at this point, he hadn't been in the band for what, 20 years? It's like time to move on, I think, right? So anyway.
And Arnel does a great job. And you know, who doesn't want more Neil. I mean, Neil's awesome, right?
He totally is awesome. And if you've
Yeah.
ever seen them live with Arnell, he's a great frontman. And quite frankly, it's, if you're someone who the thought of not hearing those songs live again is a pretty terrible prospect. Well, you don't have to worry because he doesn't sound exactly like Steve Perry, but he's close enough, and these songs sound the way you remember them. And I think that's what they were going for. It's what a lot of these older bands who have replaced singers, Foreigner does. I mean, we can go on and on about all these bands who have replaced the classic singers with someone who sounds similar, because they still want to go out and make a buck. They still want to bring, make some money. And the fans still want to go and see those songs live. And you know what? You got to bring it as close as you can to the classic era. And I think they totally do that. So
Yeah. Yeah, and the other thing that always comes to mind is that question of logic. It's like, well, you're supposed to get better with old age, right? You're supposed to actually be a better guitar player, a better songwriter, better production. Well, production's an easy one. It's always going to get better.
Yeah.
And I don't like old Journey productions. I just find all that Mike Stone noisy distortion stuff bothering, right? On music that doesn't seem like it should have that, right? So yeah, I mean, I totally agree. And again, did people not listen to it because Journey and the 80s go together? Like, that's another thing, right? It's like, are they a band of that time? And then now you just think they just don't fit in the world. So
yeah, or like we just talked about it like a week ago. It's like, people who grew up on that stuff in the 80s, they kind of once the 90s started, they closed the door. It's like, all right, I'm not going to listen to anything by new bands or new stuff by older bands. And I can listen to Departure and Frontiers and all that stuff. That's all I ever need for the rest of my life. And anything else doesn't count. It won't be as good. It won't be as good. It's already, you've made your mind up. So, giving this a chance would be maybe one listen. I heard a couple tracks. It's not as good as, Escape. Yeah. Well, after one listen, you're not going to know that, right? I mean, you've had Escape for 30 some odd years, right? So anyway, let's not go down that rabbit hole once again, because I could spend an hour talking about that.
Yeah. Okay, so my next choice definitely fits the mandate of this concept. The Who, Endless Wire. This album was reviled when it first came out. I mean, this is the band's first album since It's Hard. This goes, that goes back to, what is that? So this is 2006. So we go back to, I think it's 1982 for that, 80, the one before it. So this is a long time between albums. And this album is so baffling. It annoyed a lot of people. It kind of annoys me too, because you never really learn this album completely. It's got all these short little pieces of music, long songs, instrumental. Well, not actually that much instrumental. It almost seems like it has more, but it also has like kind of reprisey things going on. It's got some odd vocals. Obviously, the mainstays of the band are Roger and Pete, and they're all over this. And I think it is quite Who-like. But what I love about this is it just steps out and breaks so many rules about album making. You've got disc one, which is a bunch of regular length songs, but then you go into this Wire and Glass, a mini opera, which are broken up by a minute 21, minute 28, 207, 204, Trilby's piano, Endless Wire. That's one that recurs. We Got a Hit kind of recurs on here. Which is a great Who song. So this has a bunch of stuff like that is really a man in a purple dress, which is like piano and really kind of anti-religious, pretty interesting. In the Ether is one where I listened to that like 15, 20 times before I actually looked at the credits and realized it was actually Pete singing. I didn't think it was Pete singing. I thought they had a guest singer in on it, right? Very, very strange record. But I loved it right away. I find it like really, really fearlessly creative, and Who fans just hated this. We actually did a Contrarians episode where I picked Face Dances as my favorite Who album, which is a pretty weird choice too. I don't think people hate that album as much as they hate this album. This one really got a lot of bad abuse. And then It's Hard, I really like a lot as well, and that got a lot of abuse. So the last three Who albums, excepting the new one, which I'm not a big fan of actually, all three of them, were in for a lot of abuse. So this really fits the mandate of I want people to like give this some time and rise to the challenge of trying to sort out in your head where all the songs are, and did I just hear that again, and why is this a minute along, and what is this, and mellow arrangements, some full band arrangements. It sounds like a weird extended EP of a bunch of fragments, but it actually is a full-length album. But yes, very, very strange one. It literally, I would almost go so far to say this redefines the art of making an album, which is really cool because Pete,
Yeah,
creative dude, right?
I remember when that came out, and I'm a lifelong Who fan, and I got behind it pretty positively. But I found like over time, I kind of understood. I don't think I understood it, and as the time went on, I understood it less. And I think you're spot on. It's like it almost seems like a lot of fragments of things. And I think I came to a decision probably a couple years after it was released. That's like, well, I don't know if I like the Who doing stuff like that.
Right.
And I never revisited it again. So I think in honor of this episode, I am going to go and listen to that after we get done, because I haven't heard it in years. And meanwhile, the most recent one I've liked a lot because I think it went back to doing what the Who do really well, which is, write songs. Yeah. So, but I think it's a pretty daring album to come back with a release after so many years and to put out an album like that. Pretty ballsy of Mr. Townsend, I think.
I mean, to open with Fragments, it's 3:58, but it's almost kind of new agey, and it does the Bob O'Reilly thing again, right? With the kind of repeating loop. But that when he goes into that snowflakes falling part and stuff, that's just one of the most magical moments in all of Who history. When that arrangement comes on with those big vocals and stuff. And just some really good songs on here. It's Not Enough is an amazing song. And definitely We Got a Hit is just a lot of fun.
Yeah, We Got a Hit is great. Yeah. That's really good. Yeah, I'm going to revisit that because it's been a while. All right, 1985. This album was looked at pretty much as a disaster, and I think most fans of UFO probably don't give this a second thought at all ever. Misdemeanor.
Yeah.
I remember buying this on vinyl when it came out, and I completely loved it. Was I disappointed that the band as I knew it was basically done? Yeah, this is basically, Phil Mogg and a bunch of guys. Paul Raymond's still here. Some guitar player named Atomic Tommy M, who I didn't know from a hole in the wall, but man, good player. It's like, I think this, and this album is of its time. This fits right into that whole mid-late 80s commercial hard rock, metal, hair metal, whatever the hell you want to call it. It's definitely much more accessible than the UFO stuff that came before it, but it's catchy as hell. There's a lot of keyboards, a lot of synths. This Time is a great song. Mean Streets is probably the really big hard rocker on the album. I think Phil sounds great. One Heart, it's got hooks to die for. The Only One, this is guy kind of revisits that whole Springsteen thing that he likes to do. Heaven's Gate, terrific song. Reckless is good. Name of Love. It's a really catchy, upbeat album. It rocks fairly hard in spots, but it's loads of hooks. Is it a good UFO album? Probably not. And I think that's the problem that most people had with it. And this gets completely overlooked. I've heard many people say how this is like the worst thing they ever did. Perhaps, ranking down low with the album they did with Lawrence Archer just a couple years later, but that's a story for another day. But yeah, I like this album. I think it's fun. I think it's just good, catchy, hard rock stuff. This, do you miss the guitar histrionics of Schenker and Paul Chapman? Yeah, but Tommy's pretty good on here. Maybe we just don't hear enough of him. I think he gets overshadowed by the keyboards on here. But again, it's 85. Geez, we've talked about a bunch of albums from this time period that were probably tempered by what was going on in the 80s with so many other bands with all the keyboards, electronic drums, and all that kind of crap, and those big, choruses, and everything's got to have hooks and ballady and whatnot. But I think this is a terrific record. It's a lot of fun. And again, is it top shelf UFO? No, but still pretty good on its own right, I think.
Yeah. I if I saw your UFO ranking, obviously you're not going to rank it super high and stuff. But the one thing, I mean, I'm still not completely on board with that album. To me, you're right though. High Stakes and Dangerous Men is probably the one that's always going to rank right at the bottom, right? People really, and maybe UFO 1 or maybe maybe flying, UFO 2 flying, right? Possibly. But High Stakes is rated pretty low, and that one's rated pretty low. The Ain't Misbehaving EP is rated pretty low, right? That whole era. But yeah, the one thing I will say about that record that I think you know, people really should appreciate it for is, even when UFO is in shambles, they have a little bit of that Aerosmith thing where you know, things could be completely in shambles, but they're still going to work really hard on the album, right? And so you do get kind of you know, proper arrangements and productions and performances that compete with what's out there in the marketplace, even though you know at various times through the career Phil can barely even get up off the couch, right? Kind of thing, right? But they still managed to pull the rabbit out of the hat, as it were.
Yes.
So,
yeah, absolutely.
Funny. Okay, so my last choice for today is this record here, Deep Purple, Slaves and Masters. So there's
Great
a
choice.
CD of it, and there's a LP of it. You know, it's the kicking post of the whole catalog. You know, certainly past any of the, well, let's say the classical album is the kicking post of the whole catalog, right? But you know, it's the only one with Joe Lynn Turner singing on it, and I play this album all the time. I love this album. I have no problem with it at all. I in fact think it's probably in a better, happier place, more creative place than The Battle Rages On, because you do know of all the bad blood there, you know, trying to get Ian back and it's not working, you know, Ian and Richie together again. But this was a daring move. Pretty strange that they would bring Joe Lynn Turner on. But, you know, I went through it yesterday again, just to make sure for this episode, and swear to God, I think I like this better than all three of the Rainbow albums with Joe Lynn Turner. It's close with the last one, Bent Out of Shape, but love the Roger Glover production on this. It's just really good, full-bodied, lots of bass, but it's very analog. It's actually, I think the sound on this is better than House of Blue Light, actually, and Battle Rages On, come to think of it, and probably even Perfect Strangers. So production-wise, it's my favorite. 1990, but it sounds, obviously it's a Deep Rainbow album. It's totally, you got Ian, you got Joe Lynn kind of writing all the stuff, Rogers here, and it's got you know, King of Dreams is their new Bad Attitude, or new Perfect Strangers, right? But yeah, Cut Runs Deep. Fire in the Basement I'm not that crazy about, but Fortune Teller for a mellow one. The end of the album is great, with Too Much Is Not Enough and Wicked Ways. But yeah, just a good quality. This is their Judas Priest point of entry, or Judas Priest Turbo kind of thing, where you can kind of go back to it, and you're never totally sick of it, because half the time you forget it even exists, just because Joe Lynn Turner's on it, right? So yeah, a lot of time for that record.
I have a really weird relationship with that album.
Oh yeah,
really strange. You know what? If it said Rainbow on that front cover instead of Deep Purple, I'd probably really like it a lot.
Yeah.
You know what? I don't hate it. I've never hated it. I was pretty into it when it came out. I saw them on that tour. I thought they were terrific. But the whole time I'm thinking to myself, and I still, all these years later, still think to myself, it's like, you know what? Rainbow and Deep Purple were a little too closely tied, right? And bringing him on board for me just doesn't, and calling it Deep Purple just hasn't sat well. And I don't know why. And I'm being really stubborn about it, because I normally am not that way. I normally give situations like that, you know, a chance. I mean, I sound like I haven't given it a chance. I like the album. I don't love the album. And I think because to me, I always felt it should have been a Rainbow album. And I've got some kind of block that's come up, and I don't know why. And I'm not really happy that I feel that way, because I, like I said, I'm not usually wired that way, but I've always had this weird thing for that album. And you're right. It sounds great. There's a lot of great songs on there. Joe sounds terrific. I guess, I don't know. I just, part of me also feels that like John and Ian were maybe not happy with the situation.
They're not on board. No,
and
they're not on board.
Yeah. And I kind of felt that.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, well, you know, maybe Richie should have known better.
Yeah.
But we all know the history of why Joe was brought in, why him and he, you know, Gillan had the, you know, I mean, there's a whole story. Everybody knows the story. But I think it's a good album. I tend to rank it pretty low when looking at the whole catalog because to me, it just kind of doesn't feel like a Deep Purple album.
Yeah.
And I don't know.
It
I don't
sucks
know.
that they only did one. It sucks that, it also, it's just messy, right? Because you've got an American lead singer. You can bring an American into the band, but when it's actually the lead singer, that's making a pretty big statement. It's a guy from a whole different generation as well. And it's a guy not from that classical proggy, early hard rock tradition. It's a whole different kind of guy you're bringing in. So I
Even though
wish
we
they would
knew
have made
him
more.
well. I mean, we knew him well. It's not like Joe was an
Yeah.
unknown, right? So,
Yeah.
and I'm a big Joe Lynn Turner fan. I love those Rainbow records. So I don't really understand. I've had a hard time in all these decades understanding why I feel the way I do about that record, about that time period in the band. I don't know. I didn't think Richie should have gone there. Because you got to leave those two things separate. It's like if you really wanted to work with Joe again, well, then why not just keep Rainbow going and don't do the reunion, right? Obviously, money talks, right? So I don't know. I just, to me, it would have made more sense. Maybe you break Purple down at the time, or Richie just leaves and reunites Rainbow and take, because the thing is, I in my heart of hearts, I don't think that Richie wanted to do Deep Purple or Rainbow in that point in time. He was already on the way to other things.
Yeah.
So it's almost like, why go through the trouble of breaking up the Mark II lineup when your heart's not in this anyway, and you're not sticking around long term. You can't tell me that Blackmore didn't know that he wasn't long for this band at that time.
Yeah. And even as students of the band, like you say, if they would have just called this a Rainbow album, it might not even come to mind. I'd know, but it wouldn't particularly come to mind that it wasn't Rainbow. It just sounds so much like a Rainbow album, like all, ticking off all the boxes of the kinds of songs you would expect on a Rainbow album. They almost tick off more boxes for that than they do for a Deep Purple album.
Well, that's my point. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it just doesn't feel like a Deep Purple album to me.
Yeah.
Because I think, you've got the writing partnership between those two guys back together again. The kind of songs they do together. And sure, you got Roger and the other two guys also in the mix there, but it doesn't sound like a Deep Purple album. Does it sound like a very good Rainbow album? Yes, it does. And I give it credit for that. But I'm just like, for me, it's almost like that album shouldn't have happened as a Deep Purple record. And, then you go to Battle Rages On. It's like, all right, that sounds like a Deep Purple album, right? And again, I know it has a lot to do with the singer, but even like the Coverdale Hughes albums sound like Deep Purple albums. I don't know. It's weird. It's weird how when you look at bands you really love a lot, right? And they have these kind of, things in their history that whatever. Anyway, my number one. I'm a huge fan of this album. I loved it when it came out. I know a lot of fans of Electric Light Orchestra do not like this album at all. Discovery from 1979, this is their kind of like their disco album, right? But, they were already kind of incorporating those, their love of prog rock and the Beatles. And then, of course, with a New World Record, Out of the Blue, you start to see these kind of disco things floating into their music. They really got into it with this album, but there's some just absolute great songs on this album. Again, it's a little more stripped down. There's a little less strings. There's more synthesizers here, and this album did pretty well for them. I mean, this was no out of the blue, blockbuster, but it did really well for them. I mean, Shine a Little Love is a perfect example. I mean, this was released as a hit single, perfect example of them incorporating the disco rhythms and all the sweeping synths and a little bit of strings. I mean, it just totally made for that. Confusion's a great pop song. The Diary of Horace Wimp is very cool and quirky. Reminds me of some of their earlier material. Last Train to London, again, yes, very disco-y, very popish, but should have been an enormous hit. Then you got the lovely Midnight Blue, On the Run, and of course their big hit, Don't Bring Me Down, which is as much a pop song as a hard rock song, as it incorporates a little bit of disco, those big Bevan drums. And I love this album. I think it's a fun album. Most people, when they look back on the catalog of ELO, though, don't care for this one too much at all. And I love it. And I think it sounds good. It's got this big, bold production and maybe too overproduced to an extent, but I love it. But a lot of people don't.
Yeah. I totally agree. I love the production on it. I love the way things are blended on it. And I'm perfectly fine with ELO kind of doing that disco stuff, because I think the disco stuff is pretty interesting when it's by a band who incorporates orchestration. and things like that, rather than too much of just the guitar, bass, and drums with the, the funk chicken scratch guitar or whatever, or that keeps it really simple. The prog stuff is always in what they do. And I love how the sounds just get a little more sophisticated and a little more blended over time, where you're not feeling the separation with that band.
Yeah, because early on it's like, all right, well, this song is kind of like a classical song, this song's kind of a prog song, this is a total pop song, here's a little psych here, because that's the early part of the catalog was like that. Every song was like kind of completely different, whereas I think on definitely with a New World record, I think they started incorporating everything. So every track you got had those big sweeping strings and the lush keyboards and synths and those Beatles harmonies and, the little bit of the disco rhythms, and every song kind of had that. So the pretty unique band when you think about it, doing this sort of thing, right?
Yeah, very cool. Wicked.
Well, I think this was fun. We got another episode out of it. We got another one coming. So that's
I think so. Yeah.
I'd say so. And that'll be in 2 weeks. I think we got something else for everybody next week. You want to talk a little bit about next week's topic, Martin?
Yeah. So it's a little related to this week's topic. We're gonna look at guilty pleasure bands. So it's more like a whole band that people are a little shocked that you play a lot. Yeah. So it's kind of like the larger, more macro version of this.
Yeah. Yeah, I probably get more requests for guilty pleasure themed shows than anything else. Even though I've done a lot of them, done them on the Hudson Valley Squares, but people continue to ask. It's like, they want to know the stuff that we listen to that maybe doesn't fall in line with everything else we listen to, that maybe we don't talk about a lot, but we have an affinity for. So we're going to do that. That'll be next week. And then in 2 weeks from today, part 2 of albums most people hate, but we love. So stay tuned for that. Martin, what's new on the book front?
Nothing much, just kind of writing a lot. Anything that I do have is at martinpopoff.com. Still got the Heep, the Thin Lizzy, got those big ones, and the Flaming Telepaths, Sweet Angel. But not much new coming in, and just kind of in writing mode right now. Still writing about the Damned every single day, writing about all those songs. I just finished Grave Disorder album. Now I'm into the So Who's Paranoid album, which is one of my favorites. So
damn, I'm spending a lot of time writing about the Damned.
Yeah, exactly.
Speaking of the Uriah Heep book, so mine has arrived. So everybody, you can expect a full review of that hopefully sometime next week if I have enough time over the weekend to kind of get through it all. It's absolutely gorgeous. So I'm really looking forward to that. So, all right. So what's new here on the channel? Stay tuned for another edition of Classic Album Rewind, which will be coming up right after this. Today is Robin Trower Day, so stay tuned for that as we wind up the last couple episodes of Classic Album Rewind before Favorite Bands A to Z start to take us through the month of July. And what else is happening here on the channel? Well, we got no Hudson Valley Squares on Monday, so because we've got 4th of July holiday here in the U.S., so I've given everybody the night off on Monday, so you'll get just me doing like a live broadcast, little Q&A type of episode. So that's coming up at 8:00 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Monday. Martin, if you're busy,
I must say 1976 was epic. I mean, that was so thorough because we had a lot of people on. We went through all that. There were other people's lists, and there were honorable mentions, and literally like we solved all of 1976 by the end of that show. So that was really cool.
But left a lot out because that's how good the year was. Right.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that was a pretty epic show. I enjoyed doing those year focused episodes because man, especially the 70s, you pick almost any year, it's like mind-boggling how many great albums came out in that decade. It really is. So yeah, that was a lot of fun. So thanks for watching, everybody. Visit us on the web at www.seaoftranquility.org. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, of course, we're here on YouTube all the damn time. In the comments below, list some albums that you really like that most of the people seem to hate. So I'll be curious to see what everybody comes up with, and stay tuned for part 2 of this in 2 weeks here at the Funhouse. For Martin Popoff, I am Pete Pardo. Have a good weekend, everybody. Take care.